Welcome all. This is an exciting format, and very interested in having this 20-minute conversation, very compelling conversation, related to introductions. Because of the 20-minute nature, you guys have it in the panel. We're gonna skip that portion, but the description today, talks about the implementation of staying ahead of the risk, implementation of AI. We're all living under a rock if we haven't explored the implementation of AI, or at least it hasn't hit our radar as security leaders. So specifically, we want to talk a little bit about agentic AI, and that's kind of a subset of AI. And Kasia, can you kind of just at least expand on what agentic AI is before we kind of dive into the implementation of agentic AI?
Yeah, it's really the use of autonomous, an AI that it does autonomous and has decision-making capabilities. So if you think about the year of the agent, and all these agents going all over the place, these are agents that can make decisions on their own, and they're basically automated. So. And it's using, in many cases, it's using a technology called RAG, and that is essentially taking the data and then being able to make decisions on that data.
So that seems like it has a ton of potential, but it also gives me chills up my spine thinking about the risks associated with allowing, having our employees and allowing our businesses to implement agentic AI to make decisions autonomously, and what it could potentially present to companies. So do you want to kind of lead us off, this panel off, as it relates to just the risks associated with that?
I mean, I think agentic AI is exciting just in general. So the security, Kasia thinks, yay, AI is so exciting. And then the security person in me says, whoa, scary. There's a lot of scary stuff talked about today. Some of the words, I wrote down disruption. I also wrote down, and that was from Brett, dynamic. Ofer, I think you said dynamic like 15 times, which really talks about where we're at today. Trust, threats, resilience, global complexity, supply chain, adversaries. Like, if we're not scared enough, like that, that is those are some scary words, right? So I think, the CSOs and CISOs of the world are probably thinking they're like Tom Cruise, in Mission Impossible on top of the train, and there's the bad guys on the train and you're trying to kill all of them, or Gal Gadot for the women CSOs and CISOs as Wonder Woman. So, we're really in this weird, complex, nature, and agentic AI, for me, there's two things. One, it helps with operational efficiencies. There's a lot of opportunity to take data that has been unstructured in some ways and use that data. But then there's also a lot of risks that come along with it. And if you don't know who's deploying agents on your network, CISOs are now from like RSA saying, I don't want another agent on my network. Right? Because they're so hard to track. And where is that coming from, right? What model are they using? Are they using a broken model that now creates a backdoor? Flip side, the operational efficiencies, there's some great opportunity as security leaders for that. So I think, for me, it's, a balance of risk. And I think it was Brett or Ofer said, striking a balance between risk and opportunity. And being very strategic in the decisions you make using agentic AI, right?
Yeah, excellent. Jennifer, I'll turn it over to you. As being a CISO, a leader in this space, what are your thoughts on the risks associated with this specific, mitigating, everyone has the best of intentions when they explore this type of stuff, but putting this on your network as a CISO, what are your thoughts, Jennifer?
I think that there's a couple of things that I I think as a CISO and working with a lot of different CISOs in the space, I think if you are to consider whether or not you are going through a process of doing a checklist to make sure that as you're deploying it, you're doing it safely and you're doing it, with the ethics, built into the process. So by design. So that means that you have to already kind of have a strategy as to how that's going to be done. And if you don't, then I would say that's the first thing, is to start there, make sure you've got a strategy. The other piece is the governance piece. If you have a good governance mechanism, and it's already set up, then perfect, lean into that. If you don't, start that, get that process going, because that's going to be where you'll be able to take action when something goes awry. That's where you'll be able to address something or mitigate a risk. That's how you'll be able to handle incidents. So go ahead and get that established. Make sure you have all the key players in place. So I think that's one of the main things that I would say. The other part is, and I say this all the time, is that don't be afraid to, as security leaders, speak up and say, I need to be involved at every step. Don't be afraid to say that, because it really is the case, right? So the other thing is, if you are a security leader and you've got your strong programs, then you already have the blueprint as to what it is that the organizations should be doing in terms of implementing agentic AI. So that's the first thing I would say. And then the other part I would say is that if you are going to speak up and be a part of it, I also think as an organization, especially from a leadership perspective, we should really almost be militant with how we are, building our programs and making sure that they're, resilient.
So let's unpack this a little bit, Jennifer. This is really good thoughts. How as maybe the chief security officer here in a room who's just learning about agentic AI, and you talk about, hey, establishing a strategy and don't be afraid to speak up. Like, what would be some actionable next steps that they should bring back to their C-suite as it relates to, hey, this is how we need to educate you related to this specific risk. It's probably looming within our confines, friendly confines of our cyber team or cyber world. How do they go back and talk to the C-suite? What are your recommendations on that?
I think the C-suite probably has a conversation around, is it always in assistive mode? Let's go ahead and start there. Let's make sure that's happening. The other piece would be is the human in the loop at all times? That's critical. I don't think at any point should we be building it and not baking that into the process. So the human integration piece, I think, is imperative. The other part, I think, is when you talk about when you're gonna step through or how it was implemented. Remember, we did that with cyber, right? Where anytime we were building something, we had to be able to explain it. We had to be able to, make sure it could stand the test of time. It could be audited. Well, I think the same thing applies here. I think when you start speaking that conversation to the C-suite, that makes sense to them. They've already started to learn that, that muscle is there. So I'm going to say it. I think that, AI and agentic AI should be baked into, your program from a cyber, perspective. If that's the case, APIs, identity, all of that still plays. It doesn't go away. So don't lose sight of what you're working on, right? And only be focused on the AI part and forget all of the basics and all of the things that we already have learned through, all of the exposure, experiences, breaches, opportunities, innovation, all of that still plays. So that's my recommendation.
Yeah. So,
hey, Mark,
yeah, Peter,
could I add on to that too? I see it a little, Jennifer, I think your comments are spot on, but this is what I typically see. The C-suite is not the blocker for any kind of AI revolution. In fact, many of you, no doubt, are living under mandates to integrate AI-ready solutions and efficiencies like yesterday. And so there's an appetite for that. The real conversation is around operational readiness and how to prepare a workforce to then wield these tools in a way that you're not frivolously spending money on stuff that's just going to sit on the shelf or be ignored by humans. And Jennifer, you mentioned it here. I'd use a slightly different word, but it's the human in the loop and it's the safeguards. And at the same time, if you want some cherry words to use, we're at a period right now where we've got to accelerate decision velocity. And that resonates well through corporate teams right now to say we're at the precipice of being able to rapidly accelerate our decision velocity because of agentic AI in this arena, be that physical security, cybersecurity, or any other.
That's great.
I think in the security space, we tend not to make decisions very fast because we look at the risk. And you're right, organizations are moving really, really fast. There's mandates from the C-suite to say, hey, we want to go deploy this. I think it's really important as security leaders to understand what your organization as a whole is doing with AI. What is the strategy that's been discussed and shared with the board? What are the different organizations and stakeholders doing with it in your organization? And then how, because I think that also, we miss that part. It's like, yeah, how do you use AI in security? That's great. But what are people in your organization doing with AI that you need to know about that's going to create a risk and something your security organization needs to know about, whether it's a CISO or a CSO organization? You need to know how the whole entire organization is using it. And you're right, some are going to be moving a lot faster than others. I mean, I'm going through that now. I'm working with companies that are moving extremely slow to adopt it. That's okay, right? They can take that time to develop their strategy, prioritize their solutions and what outcomes they want from it. You need to have a strategy and you need to know these are the 3 things I need to solve the problem on. And if you don't know that, it's not the right time for you to go jumping into the AI pool yet, right?
Yep, it's still very much early innings.
Yeah.
And I think this is a self-selected audience here by virtue of you being in this room. You're interested in propelling some of that innovation forward before the masses keep up. I mean, we look at this world in physical security thinking that the last major innovation breakthrough, what was it, maybe 20 years ago with the advent of IP cameras and so on, right? We had a whole different infrastructure to implement. There have been incremental changes, of course, in access control, et cetera, but now, cyber went through this back in the Audis when, I don't know if everybody uses that term, but like 2007 is when cyber started to get very serious because of malware variants exploding, polymorphic variants, and so it obliterated the staid AV industry, okay? So now in physical security, you say, we go talk with folks every day that still can't check how many times a door has been propped open. There's no way to even quantify these things. Unauthorized entry or tailgating incidence rates, right? These are basic questions around visibility and an understanding of an operational estate that will only face as an industry increasing pressure to have answers to.
Yeah. So, in these conversations with the C-suite, a lot of them, whether it's a self-imposed mandate or a recommendation from your leadership, may very well, because of the questions associated with AI and agentic AI, they may very well give you a mandate or certainly a strong recommendation of, hey, let's pull in some third-party vendor to provide guidance, advice, implementation strategies, et cetera. How do we, because it's so new and because it's constantly changing, the models are changing and everything is changing, and there's so much information that's coming out almost at a breakneck pace, hours, days, sometimes weeks. But how do we vet what is the process associated with if we wanted to bring a third party in? What is your recommendation? What is the panel's recommendation? I'll open it up to the whole panel, but the panel's recommendation on how do we vet a third party that should be brought in to give us advice?
I personally, I think it's so important to surround yourself with a good ecosystem. I was at an event last year and I was talking about AI, and I've been talking about AI for a long time, given my role at Intel previously. And I mentioned to the security guy, about AI, and it was like deer in the headlights. And I said, well, who would you go talk to about new information and learning about AI, like who would you talk to? And he said a company name. And if I say it now, everybody in this room will know who it is. And I was like, that's the wrong company to probably ask. Like, they're just gonna want you to buy more of their products. They're not gonna help you on the journey. So I think it's really important to understand, do they know the trajectory of, what are they doing with AI? Do they know the trajectory? What is the roadmap? Where are things going relative to capabilities and use cases? Because I think now more than ever, security leaders are this return on security, right? We always talk about it, but it's a real thing where organizations beyond your security group are wanting to do things with cameras, right? I mean, there's 1 billion cameras on the planet. Their number one workload, edge workload out there for AI. And you're gonna need to start thinking beyond, security. Now it's like, what are the business cases? But you need an ecosystem, I think, that's gonna be able to help you along. And it's probably not going to be the typical security industry. I know there's people outside the industry building big visual language models for cameras. And you need to kind of think outside of the box, in my opinion. So when you're vetting, understanding strategy, future roadmaps, products, integrations, security, how are they cyber securing it? What are their privacy policies? What are their ethical development policies? Are they keeping up on vulnerabilities? Shadow logic, by the way, is a real thing, and that's going to affect cameras. And so it's being able to ask those questions, and if they cannot answer those, they're probably not the person you want to go buy from.
Yeah.
So.
Anything else?
I think alignment from the beginning as to what it is that you want to achieve with your third party and what that outcome is. I think that's key. I think having that kind of already defined checklist of everything that you just kind of walk through, that kind of says, these are all the things that we need, this is what we're looking for, and these are the things that we will not ignore, right? Meaning, does the technology have the ability to scale?
Yeah.
Is it able to deal with the future situations, and how quickly are they able to adapt? All of those things, I think, also play into it.
Yeah.
I think also the operational side of it is, and we've touched on this already, but the business aspect and what it is we're trying to achieve, and then that selection process should be the same as everything else security is doing, is quickly being able to integrate into the process as they're doing it to ensure that we're actually enabling the business to meet that need. I think that's the other part to it. So when you look at it from that perspective, the business, and what do you want to achieve, and what are the goals, and then, hey, what are our requirements? What do we need to make sure we have in place? Will we be able to defend our organization with this tool? Those are the things that I think organizations would be looking at. And again, leverage your governance mechanisms to have the right parties involved in the decision-making process.
Yeah.
To me, the biggest bang for the buck, I said it a little bit earlier, operational readiness is the first thing to grade on it. Number two, a strategy works when there's some compound benefit to a series of choices being made together. And so the right question to be asking yourselves in your own context is, where does AI enhance an already existing investment? Too often, we're looking at this as very black and white and as a full-on replacement. I know our own choices in developing our solution was to just work with existing camera infrastructure, recognizing that that was a very large investment that's made. So now we're augmenting a human workforce, existing camera infrastructure, and then combating that big problem of scale that I at least attempted to articulate earlier that just makes proactive threat detection nigh on impossible with a human workforce alone.
Is there folks that may have just learned about Agentic AI? Everyone knows, or at least is aware of AI, but the Agentic piece of it, I know that there's a lot of cyber risk associated with it. Some of the Agentic AI providers out there, a lot of them are based in China or in riskier locations. Is there, from a panel perspective, is there any recommendations to the folks here in the room as to if they want to learn more information? Is there a safer Agentic AI provider that they could explore, or is it all kind of you accept a certain level of risk, at least here in this
Safe
current
and
state?
easy are two words never to use in security, right?
Yeah.
Or 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that there's some established industry standards that have normalized this a bit. That if you just start to scratch in, I mean, a company like mine and just about everybody else in the industry now has a standard set of things and safeguards about how data is used, how it's protected, how it's governed, how China was an absolute no-fly zone, and that would be, I've got some profanities to use around that, having spent a lot of time operating against the Chinese in my career, but I don't think it's actually that scary anymore because of those standards. I'll use a little bit as a wobbly word because there's nothing in industry that says this is the standard, but in terms of getting to understand data governance, opt-in or opt-out, here's the real question that I think is even more imperative. And what typically happens is everybody will say, I want all of the AI and all of the innovation in the learning model, but don't you dare use my data to train it. And that is something that we are actually, I don't know what the right answer is there, but there's a logical fallacy baked in if we were to all universally adopt that approach. And that's where I think we're actually going to have to push ourselves to come up with well-governed use to advance.
Well, I think you're using, in some cases with Agentic AI, you're using your own data, right? It's taking your data and it's processing that data in a way that it's now usable and or providing some capability. An example of that is with SIA, we launched Ask SIA. So if you go to SIA's website, on the front is Ask SIA. That is a use of Agentic AI where it's using SIA's data, everything, all that valuable content and everything. They're using that data and you can go and ask whatever you want. I think there's other, when you're deploying it though, Jennifer and I are part of the Global Council for Responsible AI. We joined, it's a nonprofit, because we want to be involved in the discussion, the influence on policy, as well as the deployment of responsible and ethical AI practices. And right now it's a little bit kind of all over, right? There are pockets of frameworks and pockets of no regulation clearly, but depending on what part of the world you're in, if you're in government, there are certain capabilities you need to follow. And so we're sort of self-regulating to some degree, and that's why I think discussions like this are really important so that we can be influencing where we're going. And you're sort of going to have to self-regulate yourself. That's why getting educated on AI in general, Agentic AI, what it does, how it's being used, if there's others in your organization using it, what are they doing with it, what are the outcomes? I think it's really important now. I mean, we're on this journey. We're not to the end point, right? There's no end point for us. This is here. I was in DC last week, and one of the guys on the panel, Daniel Ragsdale, if you look him up, he's been in the Pentagon and military, worked for Sam McChrystal. He worked in the Biden, some of the guys from DC probably know him. And he said, look, we're not going to lose control, because I think everybody thinks with Agentic AI, we're going to lose control and or AI in general. And he said, we're not going to lose control. And it was an interesting conversation to hear, but it really led back to, we're going to have to sort of self-regulate ourselves for a little while. And that's why organizations that are building up standards and framework recommendations are really important to educate yourself, stay curious, right? I think that's the biggest thing. And the one thing I will say, I gave some advice to some at the table last night I was having dinner with. Watch Mountainhead. Who's watched Mountainhead in the room? So it's really interesting. I highly recommend, like, your takeaway from here is watch that movie, because you kind of see the greater world of AI and what's truly happening. It's pretty entertaining. So
Awesome. Well, thank you, panel. Mike is, I think he's staring down here. We want to stay on time, so we're a little bit over. Apologize, but thank you all for this compelling conversation. We'll obviously be available for further conversation later.